What makes a good movie can be driven by a ton of things. Great actors, beautiful cinematography, stellar writing, and unexpected twists. Whatever we really like, whichever elements we choose to focus on, is typically what we pull out of the film and use that to decide how we feel about it. And however we feel about it and what we're wanting to take away from the film is typically up to us, but not for Caroline Fargee's The Substance.
A perfect balance of 7 days each. The one and only thing not to forget. You are one. You can't escape from yourself.
This is a very particular type of film where there are no options other than the ones it gives you. It so aggressively forces its audience to look at it, and in so many ways, it tells us exactly how to feel. I'm exaggerating because there's definitely still personal perception and all that jazz that you bring with you, but I think that what makes this movie so special and what has given it the hype that it has is that it knows so confidently what it is, that it is able to lean so fully into those themes and those concepts and those ideas without any remorse or contemplation. And in that, you have to know that there are people that will hate whatever you're trying to say just as much as there are people that will absolutely love whatever you're trying to say. And there's strength in just doing and saying what you want and being so heavy-handed with your themes and your references, which we'll talk about because this movie is super obvious, just not holding anything back. And that's where you get people like me who absolutely love what this film is saying and cannot resist talking about it, because this is the substance and the obvious lack thereof. All right, cool. So before we get too far, if you haven't been here before, what's up? I'm Mars Hogan, the Something Something Film Guy. I'm still working on that title, so bear with me. But here on my channel, I talk about everything cinema, films, television, entertainment, movies, and all of the in-betweens. My channel has deep dives, lists, reviews, you name it. If that's your speed, make sure you go subscribe and check out some of my other content that I have available. There are other deep dives like this one, so you don't want to miss those because they're pretty good, if I do say so myself. And if you like this video, go ahead and drop a like and drop a comment while you're at it, especially a comment. Good, bad, indifferent, just let me know what you think, because it really helps the channel and it's really cool interacting with you all out there as an audience. And lastly, thank you for being here. Thank you in advance for watching the entire thing, I hope, and I hope that you enjoy the video.
This is The Substance.
Okay, so now, The Substance. Man, this movie is like having your eyes glued to a TV screen, like literally super glued to the glass of the screen, actually. It's painful at times, but you are completely incapable of looking away. It's a rush of feelings, and I think it'll go down as one of the most memorable movies of all time. And that's a strong statement, I get it, but it's one of those that just sticks in your brain and doesn't let go of you like ever. And could be recency bias, we'll see later on down the line in life, but still, everything in this film speaks to this central conversation around the substance of people, specifically women, and its messaging shines through every single second of the movie, which is very difficult to do. Like, it's not easy to do that and still make something that doesn't feel boring or tired or repetitive. The fact that it's as engaging as it is due to the fact that it is a really well done movie, yes, but mainly to me due to the fact that the message it has is so strong. It's such a magnificent misdirection. The Substance is so brilliant because it has none. Well, like, Let me explain. The movie is very deep, but the whole problem, the whole focus of all these characters, the whole crux of everything that happens centers on looks. We don't even get to really know any of these characters very well or very deeply, and I think that's on purpose. We keep everything really surface level, no real background, so we're really present and really focused on the optics. For a movie to have such strong messaging in it, but that messaging to be about how there is no real substance in all the looks and all the beauty and the surface level that the movie is wrapped up in is such a crazy juxtaposition when you think about it. So, what exactly is the substance? Spoilers will follow after this point, so take this as your warning. And 1, 2, 3. The story starts with Demi Moore as Elizabeth Sparkle. Such a funny name. Anyways, Elizabeth is an actress, it seems, or at least she was, and she was pretty popular and a real star. No pun intended, because the movie starts with her Hollywood star, which is beautiful and bright and shiny, but over time becomes cracked and dirty and old. And this is, of course, a metaphor for her aging, as we are introduced to current Elizabeth, a 50-year-old woman leading a workout show. Very quickly, we get into our conflict. She's getting fired for being old. The network wants someone younger and hotter, and that's where it comes in, the substance. This drug allows for her to create a new version of herself, a younger, better, hotter version of herself. There's a catch though. They each get a week and then they have to switch. She hesitates at first, but eventually she gives in, and that is where things go left. It starts off fine, but eventually the other version, who is named Sue and played by Margaret Qualley, wants to have more time. She thinks Elizabeth is wasting her time and thinks she'd have more worth from it. Chaos ensues, which we'll get to, but I want to get started here talking about how impressively and quickly this film gets off to the major discussion it's trying to have. Caroline Farghee has created such a vibrant, really vibrant expressionism with the style of the substance, and every piece of it engages your senses or your mind with one common goal of understanding. Women beauty standards are messed up. I think her French background and the history of the French expressionism art style is super prevalent in this film, and it's something that I liken to the work of another super innovative French director of recent history, Julia Ducournau. As I watched The Substance, immediately what came to mind was Titan and Raw, and just that really kind of out-of-pocket element that I feel like all three films share. While both Raw and Titan are very different and are not glitzy or glammy like The Substance is, there's a certain texture that I think all three films share where you can kind of tell the background for them is similar. They have a very similar dynamism and magnification of their central topics. I don't know. I could be reaching right now, but I felt it. And side note, watch those movies. Please go watch those movies, especially Raw. It's just great. It's wonderfully disgusting and disturbing, and I love it as sort of a revolutionary kind of young and fresh horror film. It's just, you just have to see it because it is fantastic. Okay, but anyways, enough about those really great movies, but let's talk about The Substance. So from the cold open, we're smacked with theme, and it's very obvious, connective vernacular to women and womanhood with the eggs and the injection and even pulling away a little bit, maybe stretching it, birth and chickens, all that good stuff. But I think the eggs were meaningful for a lot of reasons. However though, where we really get going with this movie is the star, which has such a variable meaning to it. Firstly, forget even seeing Elizabeth. All we see of her is this object, this star, and it's commenting on how this is all she amounts to. And in a way, immediately, immediately takes away her personhood to begin the film. Right off the bat, we're making a huge statement. And then there's the journey of the star, where people are at first appreciating it, not even wanting to step on it, to it going through the seasons, becoming weathered, cracked, stepped on, and forgotten, to finally getting splattered on by a man with the burger and barely getting cleaned up that time, because at this point, who cares? I think this sets the tone in two ways. One, the burger falling that defaces the star, the blood red ketchup staining it, is foreshadowing for a couple things later on in the film that we'll get to. And secondly, we're seeing how society has grown disinterested in Elizabeth, and it is as a precursor to her being fired from her show, and her turning 50 parallels that star and how it ages over time and just becomes another brick on the sidewalk, essentially. And what's absolutely comical and even more disparaging for what Fargy is trying to say here is the inverse comparison of Elizabeth with her boss Harvey, played by Dennis Quaid, that starts with the bathroom scene. Elizabeth walks into the men's bathroom because the women's bathroom is out of service, which to me I found somewhat unironic. From inside the stall, she overhears Harvey walk in and make commentary about her age, wanting to replace her with a new, hot, young girl, and he begins completely obliterating her value. Why this is comical is because when he walks into frame, he comes right up to the camera, like literally his nose might have been an inch away from the lens, and he looks terrible, like purposely terrible. His face is stretched in the worst kind of way from the distortion of the lens, and in addition, you can see every single wrinkle and crease and ugly element of his face in the most high definition close-up that you could imagine. And this is super important because he's like a foil almost to Elizabeth. I mean, come on, y'all. This is Demi Moore. Look at her, and then look at this guy. And that's no diss to Dennis Quaid like in real life, because I think in this movie, the point is made to have him look bad. And I think it's because he's a man and his age and his looks, it doesn't even come into play and has no relevance to him being the boss. I think that's why he looks bad, because who cares if he looks bad? He's a man. He's not a woman. They have to deal with that. He doesn't. Funny enough, right? When Elizabeth walks into the bathroom, what does she do? Stop at the mirror and look at herself. Harvey, though, doesn't even bat an eye, just makes a straight beeline for the urinal. How he looks, how he thinks he looks, just the perception of himself, completely irrelevant. But there's so much with his character that's just like, yo, what the hell? Like, there's a scene where he's talking to his secretary, who's a woman, and not only can he not remember her name, and he gives her another one that's simpler, but we as an audience don't even see her. We just hear her like off screen, and barely that. It's infuriating, even as a guy watching, to the point where it's just like unreal and just becomes funny. But that's what the movie is constantly trying to convey to us. The disparity between the men and the women, the lack of attention and appreciation and value and just everything for women in this movie. And another note here, I side with this comment. The most disgusting scene was having to watch Harvey chow down on shrimp and seeing the yellowing of his teeth on the big screen, the shrimp juices all over his fingers, the pile of shrimp heads, and hearing all the tearing and squelching and just ugh. It was disgusting. And it's really saying something that's the worst thing, because it gets really crazy in that last 30 minutes of this movie. And by the way, he literally like never washes his hands. Like, he has absolutely no regard for image at all for himself, which doubles down as an opposition to the infatuation and obsession that Elizabeth has with her image. Reflections and mirrors are obviously a major part of this narrative, and Elizabeth's character spends a lot of time with them. And it's not always a mirror, it's the huge picture of herself in her apartment, which in of itself speaks to her own evaluation of beauty standards. It's like a shrine dedicated to her younger self. You see it in her staring into her billboard, getting torn down as she drives by, to the point where she crashes her car. In a lot of ways, she can't escape herself. But also, she's kind of leaned into this idea of beauty her entire life and career. She has a snow globe of herself that I think is really telling of multiple things to me. Either the kind of crystallization, unrealistically so, of looks and attractiveness, or the trappings and inescapable nature of beauty standards themselves. So, Elizabeth succumbs. She takes the substance. And directly out of her spine, out of her own DNA, we get Sue. The substance explains that everything that comes from you is you, and that you and your new you are one and the same. This is important. But it becomes evident very quickly that this is not at all the case. And it's interesting because when I first saw the previews, and even when we were first introduced to Sue, I thought it was Elizabeth just running around in a fresh new body. But that's not it. Sue has her own identity, her own individuality, her own ability to choose, autonomy, and free will. Okay, so here's what's going on, right? Sue, she gets her life going. She fills the void that Elizabeth left at the workout show, and she becomes that new hot thing of Harvey's desires. She's loving it, the attention, all the value she's getting based off her looks, of course, but there's a problem. She has to share time with Elizabeth. She needs Elizabeth to survive. They have to switch off every week. And with this, Sue begins to see Elizabeth in a different light. She begins to feel like Elizabeth has less worth because she's wasting her time when she's on her week, doing nothing, eating poorly, just not maximizing her life. And Sue thinks to herself that she could do more. So what does she do? Begin to take extra time. The relationship between Sue and Elizabeth as we experience them on screen is very expressive of this concept of self-hatred. Because remember, the new you is still you. You're one and the same, and I think that's for a reason. For example, how Sue makes a dark, hidden closet in the bathroom in order to hide Elizabeth's body while it's her turn to live. She's ashamed of her. And the shame grows to disgust as Elizabeth's life begins to unravel. She takes down the picture of Elizabeth, throws her stuff in the closet, marking it Elizabeth's junk, which could be referring to the stuff and Elizabeth herself being just junk to her. She completely wipes away her existence, and it's clear that she doesn't feel that Elizabeth's existence is worth very much. I find it funny that Demi Moore, probably one of the most beautiful women on the planet, objectively to a lot of people, historically so, and even today, even at her age today, is being looked at like this in this film. Her being the one chosen is so interesting because it's how can we as an audience actually expect Demi Moore to be the ugly one? Seriously? Her? It's almost laughable, but it's such a meaningful choice though. Because furthermore, and this is something that my wife told me about that I didn't know, Demi Moore had a whole scandal, I guess, I don't know if I would call it that, but just a thing about her face and plastic surgery and some less than favorable comments about her about a year back or something. I'm not sure of all the details, but I would not be surprised if the producers and Fargi knew this and wanted it to be a part of the overall conversation, because that is a real life beauty standard, and the sensitivity and judgment around it coming into play for the actual actor of the role going through it, which is to me, super meta, but I digress. But anyways, yeah, Sue, she don't think too much of Elizabeth. After all, she just sits and wallows and eats and leaves the apartment a mess, and she's old and ugly and washed up and unnecessary. This is what Sue thinks, of course. But what is ignored through this whole ordeal is how bad Elizabeth must be feeling, having to deal with the younger, prettier counterpart, and the mixed feelings she must have that are probably having her lean into this depressive state that it seems like she's in. Elizabeth encounters an old man who was the Matrix version of the young man who gave her the substance when she was in the doctor's office. And he has an interesting conversation with her about self-worth, about deserving her time, deserving to live. He finishes off by saying how the other version eats away at you, which his state foreshadows as the future for Elizabeth, because when Sue takes extra time, her body withers and grows older, never to reverse again. So this is so important because if we place it in this commentary that Fargi is having about women, it's clear that this is the result of how unrealistic beauty standards cause women to compare themselves to those standards and find themselves to be worthless. In extreme cases, someone can end up feeling a strong sense of self-hatred towards themselves and their actions that aren't leading them to look a certain way, and thusly resent themselves and want to hide themselves, whether it be not going out or with clothes, for example. I think Sue and Elizabeth are the visual representation of this concept to the extreme, while Elizabeth alone is a more mild, realistic version of it. And I love that it's kind of played out on those two layers, kind of playing with these two voices that people sometimes have to cope with. Elizabeth obsesses over her image, and it's why she gets the substance in the first place. And her obsession just further devolves as Sue becomes more prevalent. She schedules a date with a man who used to have a longtime crush on her. He was obviously not her type because she was the pretty one at the time. And now that she is feeling less pretty, she wants to go on this date with him because he still really finds her attractive. But she is unable to leave her apartment to go on it. As she gets ready, she returns to the mirror over and over and over and over again, each time more visually frustrated, each time disrupting her image even more. First, she starts just by smudging off her makeup, but then she goes to be more aggressive with her actual facial features. And as the movie goes on, we see Elizabeth in her image in more distorted ways than before, which I think relates. Early on, we'd see like close-ups for her, but they would still be at favorable focal lengths. Like imagine like a 50 or a 35, something normal like that the eye would look like. But later in the film, we see her reflection in like a doorknob and in the motorcycle helmet, and her face is stretched and contorted in an unnatural way. She's kind of like Harvey earlier in the movie in that way. And in the mirror, she physically does those same kind of things by actually smushing and stretching and abusing her face. This is the movie kind of really forcing us to reckon with the consequences of the societal like hyper fixation on image. And this really is only the very, very beginning. Eventually, Sue ends up taking time until she can't take anymore, because instead of switching after a week, she doesn't switch until 3 months have passed. And it's only because she absolutely has to. The resulting effect on Elizabeth is shocking, as her entire body becomes a completely withered figure. She is aged by decades and is completely unrecognizable. And at this point, I'm gonna be honest, this might be harsh, but it's hard to feel sorry for her because she had the opportunity to stop before this happened. The substance offers a way out by getting rid of the other version of yourself, but she didn't take it. And for me, I wondered why until she finally decided to go through with terminating Sue after all this happened. Because just as it was almost over, she stops short and she doesn't go through with terminating her. And she makes a statement that's very telling of the entire idea here. She says, "You're the best part of me." Even she had long since lost her sense of self, her value, and her identity. At first, I felt like this was the first moment of redemption in this movie, like the moment where she lets Sue live. It felt like the first moment that wasn't fostered by selfishness, by personal image. But in examining it now, it's still all the same. It's a self-loathing perspective, which is different, but is just the flip side of the same coin. She fed into the idea of her own emptiness and valued the beauty over everything, even her own life. So because Sue survives and realizes she was going to be terminated, she gets into a brutal battle with Elizabeth and kills her. One of the more violent scenes as a part of this is when Sue is smashing Elizabeth's head against the mirror in the bathroom. It felt really metaphorical, like getting killed by your own image, your own reflection, the same thing you were unable to stop obsessing over the entire film. And hey, maybe it's a reach. Everything could be a reach, but it just seemed too focused and just way too ironic to me. Not to mention that it's her other self doing the killing. So now it's just Sue. And without Elizabeth, she can't survive. So what does she decide to do? Of course, it's an insane choice that you just know isn't going to work, but you also know that it's the only option. She decides to clone herself. It's silly, really, but hey, what else was she gonna do? There's a lot of things that are silly here, and it's the only logical thing in the framework of the movie to do, I guess. But the result, terrible, obviously, and it's something I don't even know if I can show on like the channel because of how absolutely repulsive it is, because it's she turned into this hybrid Elizabeth Sue monster kind of thing. And this entity, this whatever it is called Monstro Eliza Sue. Insane. But hold on, because a lot happens here and around this whole moment. So let me just backtrack a little bit. This film for me is like one huge commentary on society through the lens of Hollywood. And I love that because all the themes that are tackled are like intermingled. It's more than beauty standards, it's power structure. It's not random that in this movie, everyone in power is a man. When Sue is doing her workout show, everyone that is a part of that show, besides hair and makeup, which of course is a man. Everybody on set, like every single person. Even further back, when Sue is trying out for Elizabeth's, like her role in the workout show in the first place to be her replacement, the ones deciding are two men. While this is extremely like nail on the head, in this movie, it's so much so that it's obviously purposeful and driven in the way that Caroline Fargi is literally yelling this message at us as the audience. The power, the control, the dehumanizing force that the men are in this movie is all so purposeful. When we look at Sue before this big New Year's show she's doing, as her body is literally falling apart because she no longer has Elizabeth, she's overrun by Harvey and the heads of the studio. All these old white men standing around like they're at the zoo, and Harvey tells her to smile. In fact, when you think about it, he never really asks her anything in this movie. All the statements are kind of declarations or orders even. She's lost her teeth, so she gives this closed mouth kind of smile for them and doesn't say a word, which to me was another moment of strong metaphor as a notion of how the women in this movie who are consistently viewed as objects have no voice. Like, she literally cannot speak. And the way that these shots get framed makes it feel like these men around her are watching a show or an animal in the zoo, like I mentioned, and not like they're talking to a full-fledged human being. Pretty girls should always smile, is what Harvey says to her. Like, what is she, a doll? You know, this took me back to that perfect Elizabeth crystallized in the snow globe, and it almost brings it into real life. So when, after this, Sue births Monstro Eliza Sue, we're grappling with the idea of body dysmorphia in its most repugnant disgusting and impossible to ignore form. Something that Elizabeth and Sue both suffered with throughout the movie, whether it was Elizabeth looking at her face and her body in the mirror, or Sue having nightmares related to her body changing and not looking like its normal view of perfection. It has come to a head, and it's only right that when Eliza Sue decides to go outside and still try to do the New Year's show, she puts on her face, which is a picture of Elizabeth. And that just really brought it all like full circle to me. So Eliza Sue goes to the New Year's show, and upon everyone seeing her, they are repulsed at the monster that she's become. There's a crazy bloodbath as Eliza Sue's body breaks down, and we get some really important commentary from the movie through these moments. We're looking at this monster and being reminded of Harvey saying that Sue is his most beautiful creation and that she was shaped for success. And when it's all said and done, after a complete and total meltdown of Elizabeth and Sue, and Eliza Sue disintegrates through the disaster that is the New Year's event, all we're left with is the face of Elizabeth outside crawling to her star. She gets her final moment of beauty, and then she melts away to be wiped off the next morning and completely forgotten. I don't think that I've ever seen a movie like this. This subject, this concept has definitely been tackled before in numerous ways. In fact, like I'm immediately reminded of, what's it called? The Outside, I think is the name of the episode, but it's from Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities from Netflix, where it's like that lady goes and she gets lotion to make her pretty. It's a very, very similar like premise, but what I think makes the substance so special is its ability and desire to completely full send into this meta criticism about beauty standards and women in Hollywood, and the fact that it literally holds like nothing back. It is extremely unapologetic, and I really, really love that. It has the strongest voice I've heard out of everything I've seen that speaks from this perspective. It'll probably be sticking with me for a while, maybe indefinitely. If I did have any criticism about it, it would maybe be feeling a bit too silly and over the top at times, like just not as serious as I would have liked it to be at times, you know, just kind of going a little bit too crazy to the point where it's like, okay, is this a joke, you know? Or maybe, and this is something that I really thought about, just being a little bit too nail on the head, like just having that commentary be so obvious, because I think there's something to having nuance and layering and kind of like having an audience having to kind of like, oh, this is what this means, like figuring it out and getting that eureka moment, I feel like has a lot of value, you know, to audiences. And this movie definitely doesn't let you really have any kind of eureka moment. Like what it is, it's telling you and it's repeating it, and you can't walk out of this not understanding what it's about. It's super obvious, you know, if I'm being honest. But I'm gonna be real with y'all, I don't care. I thought it was great. So great that those setbacks don't really hold very much weight for me personally. This is just one of those movies that will really like leave a mark on you and will be completely unforgettable. Okay, and last thing, I promise, but I have to mention the alternative art for the substance has been so awesome. And I love stuff like that, like movie posters. There's so much you can do, like original ones, different ones from different people, like it's so cool. But the ones for this one have been super duper cool to me. Like I'm gonna put one up here because I really love this one in particular and how it encompasses a lot of what this movie focuses on. It's like such a perfect fit. Man, whew. This movie is like way too layered to try to talk about in a single YouTube video, like just being honest. There's just so much going on here and so many different angles you can take when breaking down this narrative. It's just an extremely like rich film, having so many different conversations at once. Like I didn't even get to mention all the Kubrick references and what all that it could even mean as part of this story. And there were a bunch of them and they were really cool. So kind of sad about that. But I feel like if I included it, I could have went on for another 20 minutes on that, just that. Apologies if I was like just rambling on this one, but I just had so much fun kind of dissecting and looking at all these different aspects of it. And this is definitely gonna be on my list to maybe revisit at a later date. We'll see about that one. Stay tuned. Anyways, I won't keep y'all out there. If you've gotten this far, thank you so much for watching. And if you've been tuned into my content, thank you even more for coming back to another video. And remember, as always, like, comment, subscribe, and turn those post notifications on too. But until next time, y'all be easy, and I'll see you soon. Peace.